The last thing my parents said to me on Christmas Eve was, "Take the suitcase and don't come back until you learn how to be grateful." Snow was falling outside our house in Ohio, the kind that turns the whole street quiet and white like a postcard. My mother stood in the doorway with her arms folded while my father placed a single suitcase on the porch beside me. I remember staring at it confused. One suitcase. That was all they were giving me. I was 23 years old, wearing a thin winter coat, holding a plane ticket to a country I had never even visited before. No explanation, no goodbye hug, just a ticket and a suitcase. And before I continue, if you enjoy intense real-life stories like this, take a second to subscribe and comment your city and local time below. I love seeing where everyone is watching from. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 31 now and I live in Chicago. But 8 years ago, on that Christmas Eve, I thought my life was completely over. You see, my parents told everyone that sending me overseas was an opportunity. That's the word they used at church, at family dinners, even on Facebook. They said I was lucky to be starting a new life abroad. What they didn't tell anyone was that I never asked to go. It started 3 weeks before Christmas when my father called me into the living room. He had that same serious tone he used when something bad had happened. "We've decided it's time for you to grow up," he said. My mom nodded beside him like this conversation had been rehearsed. Then my dad slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a plane ticket to London, one way. "You leave on Christmas Eve," he said. I thought it was some kind of joke. I actually laughed at first. "Wait, what?" I asked, but neither of them laughed. Instead, my mother leaned forward and said something I will never forget. "You've lived under this roof long enough. If you want a future, you'll build it somewhere else." Just like that. No discussion, no planning, just a decision they had already made without me. The worst part wasn't even the ticket. It was what my father said next. "You'll take one suitcase. That's it. Everything else stays here." At the time, I thought they were just being cruel. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that 8 years later, those same parents would call me, begging me to return home. Not because they missed me, because they wanted my inheritance back. I wish I could tell you that I stood up for myself that night, that I argued, packed my things, and left with some kind of dramatic last words. But the truth is, I was too shocked to fight back. 3 days later, on Christmas Eve, I stood at the airport with that same single suitcase sitting beside my feet. My parents didn't even come inside the terminal. My dad parked the car by the curb, took my suitcase out of the trunk, and set it on the sidewalk like it was a piece of luggage he didn't want responsibility for. My mother rolled down the window just long enough to say, "Call us when you land." Then they drove away. And before I continue, if this story is hitting close to home, subscribe and comment your city and local time below. I always read where everyone is watching from. The flight to London was 8 hours long. I didn't sleep. I didn't watch the movies. I just stared at the seat in front of me, trying to understand how my life had changed so fast. 3 weeks earlier, I had a job, an apartment plan with a friend, and a normal life. Now I had a one-way ticket and about $200 in my bank account. The first 6 months overseas were brutal. I stayed in a tiny shared apartment with 3 strangers in East London. The heating barely worked, and the walls were so thin you could hear the neighbors arguing at 2 in the morning. I worked every job I could find. Coffee shops, late-night restaurant shifts, even cleaning offices on weekends. Sometimes I worked 14 hours straight just so I could afford rent and groceries. And the strangest part? My parents acted like everything was completely normal. Once a month, my mom would call and ask things like, "So, are you enjoying the experience?" The experience. Like this whole thing was some kind of study abroad adventure instead of exile. I never told them how hard it actually was. I didn't tell them about the nights. I ate instant noodles because that was all I could afford. Or the time my landlord almost kicked me out because I was 2 days late on rent. Or the Christmas I spent completely alone in a tiny apartment, while everyone else went home to their families. Instead, I did what they wanted. I survived. Then slowly, things started changing. About 2 years after arriving in London, I landed a job at a small marketing agency. Nothing glamorous at first, just answering emails and scheduling meetings. But I worked harder than anyone there. I stayed late. I volunteered for projects no one else wanted. I learned everything I could about the business. And by the time I turned 28, I wasn't the broke girl with one suitcase anymore. I had a stable career, my own apartment, and more independence than I had ever had in my entire life. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I finally felt like I had built something on my own, which is exactly why the phone call I received 3 months ago made absolutely no sense. Because after 8 years of barely speaking to me, my parents suddenly wanted me to come home. When my phone rang that Tuesday night, I almost didn't answer. The caller ID said Mom, which was strange on its own. My parents and I had settled into a quiet rhythm over the years. An occasional holiday text. Maybe a short phone call every few months. Nothing dramatic. Nothing emotional. So when I picked up, the first thing I said was, "Is everything okay?" My mom's voice sounded unusually warm. Too warm. "Emily, honey, we've been thinking about you a lot lately." That sentence alone made my stomach tighten. For 8 years, my parents had barely asked about my life. And now suddenly they were thinking about me. And before I continue, if you're enjoying the story so far, subscribe and comment your city and local time below. I love seeing where everyone is watching from. At first, the conversation sounded harmless. My mom asked about my job in Chicago, my apartment, whether I was seeing anyone. It almost felt like a normal mother-daughter conversation, something we hadn't had in years. Then she said something strange. "You know, your grandmother Ruth always cared about you the most." I sat up straight on my couch. Grandma Ruth had passed away 6 months earlier. I'd flown back for the funeral, but my parents and I barely spoke the entire weekend. "What about Grandma?" I asked. There was a pause. Then my dad's voice suddenly joined the call. He must have been on speaker. "Well, there's something we should probably discuss as a family." My chest tightened instantly. Whenever my father used the phrase "as a family," it usually meant trouble. Then he said it. "Your grandmother left you something in her will." For a moment, I didn't even process the sentence. "Left me something? What do you mean?" I asked slowly. Another pause. My mom cleared her throat. "She left you the lake house." The lake house? The same house where I spent every summer growing up. The little wooden place on Lake Erie where my grandmother taught me how to fish. Where we watched fireworks every 4th of July. Where she used to say someday it would belong to someone who truly loved it. My hands started shaking. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Because suddenly the timing felt wrong. Grandma had passed away 6 months ago. My parents waited half a year to mention something this big. That's when my dad said the sentence that finally made everything clear. "Well, technically it's in your name now," he said carefully. "But we think it would be best if you transferred it back to the family." Transferred it back. In other words, they wanted me to give it to them. And right then, sitting in my quiet Chicago apartment, after 8 years of silence, I finally understood something. My parents didn't suddenly miss me. They weren't calling to reconnect. They were calling because the daughter they sent away with one suitcase on Christmas. EveNow owned something they wanted. For a few seconds after my dad said, "Transfer it back to the family," I didn't say anything. I just sat there on my couch in Chicago, staring at the wall, letting the silence stretch across the phone line. 8 years. 8 years since they sent me away with one suitcase on Christmas Eve. And the first serious conversation they wanted to have with me was about property. "Let me understand this," I finally said calmly. "Grandma left the lake house to me, and you want me to sign it over to you?" My mom answered quickly, like she had rehearsed the line. "Well, sweetheart, it's always been the family house." Family house. That phrase almost made me laugh. Because when they sent me overseas with a one-way ticket, nobody seemed very concerned about family. And before I continue, if you're enjoying this story, subscribe and comment your city and local time below. I love seeing where everyone is watching from. My father jumped back into the conversation, his tone getting firmer. "Emily, be reasonable. That house belongs with us. Your mother and I have been maintaining it for years." Maintaining it. That was interesting, because I remembered something from the will reading after the funeral. Grandma's lawyer had mentioned that the house was fully paid off, and that a maintenance fund had been left behind. A fund I later learned was worth almost $90,000. And guess who controlled that account? My parents. Suddenly, the whole situation made sense. They didn't just want the house. They wanted the money attached to it. "You know what's funny?" I said quietly. Both of them went silent. "When you sent me away 8 years ago, you said I needed to learn how to build a life on my own." Neither of them responded. "So I did," I continued. "I built a career. I built stability. I built a life without depending on you for anything." Then I took a slow breath. "But that lake house," I said, "that's the one thing in this world that Grandma chose to give directly to me." My mom's voice suddenly hardened. "Emily, don't be selfish." Selfish. The same word they used the night they pushed me out of their house. And that's when something inside me finally clicked into place. For years, I had been the quiet daughter who tried to keep the peace, the girl who accepted whatever decision her parents made. But that girl stayed behind on the porch 8 years ago, next to a single suitcase in the snow. I'm not signing anything, I said. The silence on the phone was immediate. Then my dad spoke again, colder this time. So that's your final decision? I looked out the window at the Chicago skyline glowing in the night. Yes, I said, because the daughter you sent away on Christmas, Eve doesn't belong to you anymore. And neither does the house.